What are some of the pressing issues in our community? And we're going to invite community leaders, advocates, stakeholders to discuss these issues in the context of collective kuleana and through an OEV lens. Yeah, so mahalo for joining us. And today will be the first topic we dive into, which is this current effort to protect Hakipuʻu on Oahu. It's a ahupua'a in Ko'olauloa on Oahu. And today we'll be hearing from some of the leaders of this current effort who are lineal descendants of the original kuleana landowners of some of the parcels in Hakipuʻu. And the topic is particularly significant because it entails lineal descendants that still live on the land. And it involves a complexity of issues that include iwi Kūpuna, environmental protection, land use, and quiet title. And it's also unique because it's here on Oahu, and it involves something that might be that is fairly rare on Oahu, and that is an entirely intact ahupua'a from Mauka to Makai. With the in some would say, I mean, it's obvious potential to be highly productive lands, yeah, that includes on Loko'i'a. So very hope to gain some very insightful mana'o and ike today through this conversation. And we'll delve into this and discuss our collective kuleana in terms of, reestablishing, keeping in mind, I think many of the advocates and the work being done by advocates in our community, learning centers, education centers in our community, is largely centered on reestablishing the pilina between Kanaka and ʻāina. So we'll kind of let that mana'o kind of guide this conversation today. So that said, I'll briefly introduce the lineup of speakers that we have joining us, and mahalo to all of you for taking the time out to talk about this issue and join us on this platform and share your mana'o and your experiences and your ike and your mana with everybody that's tuning in. And they will be tuning in for as long as this lives on the internet, which could be forever. So mahalo nui. Starting off, we have Malia Akutagawa, who is an associate professor at the Richardson School of Law and the Hawaii Nui Akea School of Hawaiian Knowledge at UH Manoa. She is an attorney who has worked on multiple Native Hawaiian access and gathering rights matter and iwi Kūpuna cases. Her scholarship includes the federal and state protections of iwi Kūpuna. Mahalo, Malia, for joining us. Kamana Beamer joins us from Hawaii Island, also a professor at the Center for Hawaiian Studies in the Hui Aina Momona program, which is a joint appointment with the Richardson School of Law. He is a co-author of the Aina Aloha Economic Futures Initiative and is a commissioner on the Commission for Water Resource Management. Brings a wealth of knowledge in the areas of traditional and contemporary Aina-based resource management. Mahalo Kamana. And we have Liko Hoe, who is also a kupaʻaina of Hakipuʻu. He is an educator and a founder of the Hakipuʻu Learning Center Hawaiian Focused Charter School. He's a mahiʻai small business owner and food producer for his community. Mahalo, Liko. And wrapping it up, we have Kolea and Summer Fukumitsu. Also, they are kupaʻaina to Hakipuʻu and have been leading this current effort along with their ohana to protect the ʻāina that surrounds their ohana property and this aupa'a of Hakipuʻu. Mahalo, Summer and Kolea. And our co-moderator today is David Forman, Director of Environmental Law Program and Faculty Specialist with the Kahuli'ao Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law at the William S. Richardson School of Law. He's the law school's first tenured faculty member of Filipino descent. So we're making that Filipino-Hawaiian connection. Yeah, right on. David's prior legal experience covers the gamut of public interest, private practice, and public service. And I just want to point something out, fun anecdotal fact. I was just on a call regarding our elections, our get out the vote work, and somebody shared that if Hawaiians and Filipinos aligned in their voting practices, that would be the largest voting bloc in Hawaii. So maybe we on to something here. This could be the start of something special, Professor Forman. Okay, so we'll get into it. What we're gonna do is allow each of the four panelists, well, five, including the combo of Summer and Kolea, to share a little bit about their connection to this place, why Hakipuʻu is important, what are some of the legal challenges and historical struggles that the community has faced. So let's get right into it, starting off with Kolea and Summer. Mahalo for joining us. You want to start off by, let me just provide a little bit of context. So there was a effort by the community to block some construction movement a few months back, and there were a handful of arrests. I believe 7 arrests. And Kolea, I know that you were arrested. So just providing that context, that what sparked this recent, what brought the issue to the surface recently was a direct action where community mobilized to block some construction vehicles, and now you folks are kind of hashing through those issues with the interested parties. Yeah. So mahalo for joining us, and yeah, take it away.
Mahalo for the intro, Davis. Yeah, we started off with it's just the overreaching issue in Hakipuʻu is the intergenerational battle, the trauma, oppression. It affects all the native ohanas in Hakipuʻu. This battle, this trauma, it's not new. It's been around over 150 years. The battles we're facing today, they come up in every generation. They come up with, our Kūpuna who have fought this before. This is from, just the protection of our resources, the protection for access, for the protection of sacred sites. This has been our bringing up as children. This has been our foundation. And, we're just trying to protect these places and stop the trauma so our children don't have to deal with it. Many of our people were dispossessed from kuleana lands through grant land deeds and large landowners through like the disregarding of Queen Kalama's last will, bequests that her lands go to the whole ʻāina. Much of our remaining ʻāina had been stolen through adverse possession, quiet title actions by corporate colonizers. Our waters have been poisoned with fertilizers, pesticides. This is all coming from, upstream from us, and it's affecting our waterways. It's going down to the ocean. It's affecting our gathering of our fish, our crab, our limu, and these things live in all of our surroundings. So that was our issue, is to make these things known so that we can protect them. And our cultural sites and our iwi kupuna have been impacted and destroyed. And what we're trying to do is prevent further destruction. These sites are very special to us, very significant for us, because a few of those sites they're our ohana, our lineal ohana. Those are our ancestors. And that's our job to protect them. Our job as Kanaka to protect our Kūpuna. And with these threats being made of the machines and development, we felt compelled to make a stand and stop more destruction, more of any kind of development. My family and the remaining families of Hakipuʻu, we're the last Aloha ʻāina. We're the last stronghold. We're a dying breed. There's not much of us left. We've been mahiʻai since time immemorial. I'm a kalo farmer, and the ohanas around me are farmers. And passing down this knowledge to our keiki and mo'opuna. You know, how can we do that without ʻāina? How can we do that without vai, without a kai, without these tools and material to show them, you know, where they come from and what they can use in the future to sustain themselves. If all of these things are gone, if they're destroyed, if there's no more sites to do any kind of cultural practicing, any kind of, you know, malama to sacred sites, these practices will be forgotten. No one will remember how to do them or use them. And that is our understanding of what we're here for, you know. In a sense, the productivity of one kanaka ohana is huge, you know, with the tools and materials necessary. But if you have 5, 10, 100 households of kanaka, that provides a village to sustain a city, a town, an entire community, multiple communities, and we branch that out, we share with everyone. You know, that's part of the views that we're looking at, part of the sense behind what we're standing for. We, you know, we have future plans and views and what we would like to see, what we believe that needs to happen in order to keep, you know, the culture alive, to keep the kanaka on the ʻāina. You know, it's things like restoration of traditional knowledge and practices that Kūpuna ʻike have taught and shown us. You know, many of us still carry the knowledge, but if these places and people are to, you know, be taken away from us, then what will we stand on then? What will we go back to and found ourselves on if these places are not there? You know, to just return these, you know, the people to the land of their ancestors. We're responsible for the resources, historical sites, you know, all of these things. They were once a daily routine. You had to do them. It wasn't a question of, I'm just going to drive by, jump in my car, and I'm going to wave at it. Or in special events, I'm going to do certain things. It was a daily routine. This was the steps of survival. This was the pai'aina was all of it together.
Right on. Mahalo Kolea. Yeah, thank you for that. So, you know, and just so you folks know the format, if you guys have questions that are watching, please drop your questions in the chat. We will filter through them, and get to them later on in the discussion. We'll try and get to as many of them as possible. So please drop them in the Zoom chat if you're on Zoom. If you are on Facebook, drop it in the Facebook chat thread. And we'll now go into actually ask Malia to take it away. And you know, Malia's background as a community activist herself from Molokai, and a lawyer focusing on Native Hawaiian issues. You know, what can you share with us? You know, Kolea really seems to have summarized what may be some of our kuleana, right? To keep hold of what was passed down to us, the ike, but pointing out that maybe with, you know, if not maybe, if the places don't exist, I don't know how valuable the ike can be. So yeah, maybe mahalo for joining us, Malia. Can you touch on, you know, some of the legal challenges and the legal issues at hand, and you know what successful community advocacy looks like?
Well, mahalo, Davis. A lot of thoughts swirling in my head right now, but for me, you know, as a Native Hawaiian attorney from Molokai and having a lifestyle very similar to Kolea, Summer, and Liko, you know, very rural island and strong in mana and strong in feeding our people as ʻāina momona. This issue became very close to my heart, and I became very concerned about what was going on in Hakipuʻu and with the families there. So as a Native Hawaiian rights attorney that has litigated in this area of iwi Kūpuna, and also having had a lot of personal experiences, sitting on the Molokai Island Borough Council as chair, and being part of the movement to get laws on the books to protect Native Hawaiian burials from the time of Honokahua in 1988. For me, it was imperative to help the families in Hakipuʻu and help especially Kolea and Summer that have really been on the front lines, and watching them get arrested on Instagram Live in the middle of a global pandemic, and on top of that, what was happening at Hunananiho, where Hawaiians are putting their lives at risk in order to protect the iwi Kūpuna, and knowing that as Kanaka, our ohana isn't just the present generations, it's our Kūpuna, and it's the generations not yet born. So I feel that very viscerally and in my heart as a Kanaka, and that's what motivates me. So, I took it upon myself to make some inquiries and call various agencies to see what is going on. Why is a Hawaiian family, getting arrested while trying to protect their iwi Kūpuna when they are in the right? So I was part of the early meetings between agencies and saying, hey, there's been several violations. So, what has happened is there's like 2 different properties that have been affected. One being the kuleana land at Naholoa'a property, it's called, on Johnson Road. And there is an incident of illegal grading and grubbing there, which, the Fukumitsus had given warning to Hualoa Ranch not to disturb, yet they went ahead without grading and grubbing permit. And then now State Historic Preservation Division is trying to investigate what has happened. A lot of trees were pulled out, a lot of debris, and hauled off of the property, off of Naholoa'a. And so it's caused so much grief to the families in Hakipuʻu that they could not fulfill the kuleana, that Kolea said, our kuleana is to our ancestors, our kuleana is to the ʻāina. So I feel that, that sense of hopelessness and frustration. And then more directly, the Ino land at the bottom of Johnson Road, which, Kolea is a lineal descendant of, and having seen that, through the different activities that, again, some illegal grading and grubbing was done without any kind of permit. And there are registered historic sites there. So a Lo'i terrace was partially destroyed. And that site is registered, and it's in the vicinity of ancestral remains that have been mapped, that there is oral testimony about. Yet there is a reluctance on the part of various agencies to act. There's also a gate that is blocking access to the lineal and cultural descendants and to the whole ʻāina, all the whole ʻāina of that place that rely on that trail, Kanohana Hoku trail. And, having talked with Kolea and Summer, I believe their grandmother or great-grandmother had actually sued in court to ensure that the access to this native trail would remain. But apparently there is a gate across that trail, and while more able-bodied ʻāina can try to go around, the Kūpuna, that want to visit the graves or want to have access to the ocean, they cannot. So I learned that the Department of Planning and Permitting had initially stated that they needed to get a permit, and then very recently they issued a permit. And all of these things have been done without oversight from the State Historic Preservation Division. And then furthermore, there was damage to a cesspool on the Ino land, and there was sewage, raw sewage that was pumped into an awai that led into the Kanohana Bay. So, you know, I made inquiries about that too, and there has been no response, you know, and I'm finding that the Department of Health and the Environmental Protection Agency has done nothing. They have only questioned people, but they felt there was no need to put up signs. There was no need to do any kind of water quality testing. And so the community took it upon itself to go and get training on how to do water quality testing. And they called up some UH scientists to help them with that testing. And those results have shown high fecal coliform counts, you know, above the EPA standards, as well as the presence of Clostridium perfringens, I believe it's called, and that is directly attributed to human waste. You know, yet these things don't cause any kind of red flags on the part of the Department of Health and EPA. So it's been incredibly frustrating. You know, it's frustrating enough for me, but more so for the families in Hakipuʻu who rely, you know, on the ocean to gather limu and crab and fish. And so for me, you know, I look at the public trust. There is a fiduciary obligation that the state has under the state constitution, under the public trust, and Article 12, Section 7, which is specifically Native Hawaiian rights, reaffirming and protecting Native Hawaiian rights. And I've been seeing constant government malfeasance. So for me, there's a lot of cause for concern, and I'm very puzzled as to why there has been no fines levied against Kualoa Ranch for these acts. There is supposed to be an investigation, but it seems like that's at a standstill. So for me, it's like when we look at Hawaiian rights and the public trust, the burden is not on the Kanaka to prove that harm is being caused. The burden is on the government and on those, you know, developers or permit applicants to prove that there is no harm, and if there is a potential impact, that they mitigate. You know, that's the Kapa'akai framework. So these things are very troubling to me, and I'm not sure what the next step is. If, you know, if government is not going to respond, then it's going to be on the backs of community to do something, you know. So those are the issues that I see in a nutshell.
Yeah, mahalo Malia. So there's a wide range of issues going on with this, you know, one small place. I think that's insightful. And I know for the folks that work on this issue, on these issues, frequently, it's all too familiar. Yeah, like it's just a lot for community members, families, to have to navigate. Yeah, it's you know, I know being a student, Hawaiian studies, and then at the law school, you know, starting to get like firsthand familiarity with the legal processes. I just, it's really a systemic, it's a systemic issue that you know, there's no easy fix to it, but there really has to be significant action taken in terms of organizing around, you know, what we feel not only as pono, but what is just for these communities. Yeah. So mahalo for that, and I just kind of want to lead into the next presenter, and know, again, reminder to everyone, we'll get into some Q&A and get into get in depth Professor Forman will get more in depth with some of the presenters in a few minutes after they all speak. So yeah, the next speaker, Kamana Beamer, really invited him because of his research and his scholarship and work in the areas of ʻāina and resource management, right? And having a wealth of knowledge of the practices of our Ike Kūpuna, the geography of resource management systems, and wanted, hoping that he can draw some connections that may seem, far off from us, of the traditional management practices. But, I thought this was a perfect opportunity to maybe try to connect the dots, because we do have an intact ahupua'a for the most part here on very urban, although on the countryside, Oahu. Yeah, so mahalo Kamana. Can share some mana'o with us.
Yeah, aloha mai kako. Mahalo to everyone for being here and for hearing from Kolea and Summer and Malia. I also want to say, for me, my limited knowledge of this particular area of Hakipuʻu, I have research on ahupua'a system and the ways in which our ancestors kind of produced abundance through incredible innovations, through mastery of water resources, through in-depth analysis and kilo and understanding of the natural systems and the ways that they operated within each ahupua'a and place and ili. But Hakipuʻu, my body was only there to learn a little bit with Liko's ohana and Uncle Calvin Ho, who I deeply aloha and respect. And Liko has two powerful brothers, Kala and Kauai, that I got to hang out with and run around a little bit in the area in White Sands. So Hakipuʻu is a special place to me, even though I'm malihini to it. But I know it's an important ahupua'a for all of us, and the home of some of the mo'olelo of Kaha'i and the ulu, and in many ways that ko'olau side of Oahu Island is really the poi bowl, or another way maybe the breadbasket of Oahu. So really important to ensure that our resources are maintained and that our kupaʻāina have the opportunity to return and restore abundance to these incredibly important places that, as Kolea had mentioned, and some of the stories I've heard from the whole ohana, has been an intergenerational challenge. And so, to me, it kind of, to sum it up in some ways, I've heard Kava'a talk about the wai in Oaioi, hey, who are you? What's your name, right? But really, kind of what we're asking, what I'm hearing in this situation is, what kind of water are we going to bring for our people, for our ʻāina? What kind of water are we going to bring? And we know that the ancestral practices of our ancestors, enhanced the wai. When it wasn't ideal and pure, we found ways to filter it, to run it through awai systems and return it, even more clean down Makai, and to really work, in relative harmony with these natural systems that we deified and we see as ancestors, as Kūpuna, as Akua, right? And this particular image, although it's focused on another side of Oahu, we can see the kind of water we brought when our ancestral systems were in place was the kind of water we want to drink, the kind of water we would give to our Kūpuna, give to our keiki, the kind of water that keeps us alive, the kani kawai ola, right? And we've seen all across Hawaii, when we've replaced these incredible innovative systems of our ancestors and engineered so-called, modern and progress solutions. Oftentimes, we've done so in ways that have brought really bad water, have polluted and degraded our environments. And so for me, in each and every place across Hawaii, the resource issues might be slightly different. Certainly the power politics, the ohana, the kupa of the place, might be different. But we need to find ways to support the reestablishment of our ancestral agricultural and resource systems. In the spirit of Kauikeoli, what he had intended for the Mahele was, to maintain in perpetuity people's Hawaiians' connection to place. And we know it's defined in the Constitution of 1840 that, no na ali'i, no na kanaka no ka ʻāina a me ka mo'i. So it was owned by these three classes. And Kauikeoli had really intended for our people to maintain these connections in perpetuity over time. And that's a really important point when we hear, these stories of displacement and challenges. There's an important phrase, koina e ke kuleana na kanaka, and you can find it on nearly every deed that was established throughout the Mahele process. And what that did, that phrase was to try to codify Kauikeoli's desire and intentions for ohana to always have a connection to ʻāina, to always have a kuleana to ʻāina. And what do we mean by that kuleana? Right, privilege, responsibility. Even when that land might be owned by larger landowners, Kauikeoli had intended the kuleanas, and the portions of these larger ahupua'a to maintain this kuleana for our people over time. And so that's my mana'o in this particular situation.
Mahalo, Kamana. Yeah, mahalo for your I guess perspective on this, because it really, and just that picture that Ki'ita we just had up on the screen. We're talking about, a relatively small group of ohana, to some maybe one small place in the below the Ko'olau Mountains, but really it's representative of larger, again, systemic problems that I feel like we should be very grateful to those folks who take these bold stands. I know Malia, coming from Moloka'i, the ʻāina of Ko Walter Reedy and George Helm and the like, who stood up to protect Kaho'olawe. These individual, the efforts of these individuals should not be taken lightly or dismissed. There's impacts for all of us, and there's impacts for people that live all over Kapai ʻāina, and the dynamic here that I don't think anyone's really touched on yet, and we can get into it more later. It is, well, I think you kind of touched on it, Kamana, the politics and really the power dynamic. Yeah, and so going into our next speaker, just want to make sure for those that may not know, Hakipuʻu is between Kualoa to the north and Waikane to the south. So most people probably familiar with Kualoa, but don't realize that they're driving by this space of Hakipuʻu as to get there, if they're coming from town side. So yeah, just to give everybody some perspective on the location and the significance of Kualoa and that entire area culturally, very, very significant. I know that I learned about the significance of that place from learning about Holowa'a and Hokulea, and what Kualoa means, and what the mo'olelo and the history there represents in terms of voyaging. Yeah, I hand off to you, Liko. Again, another kupaʻaina of Hakipuʻu and a food producer, educator, jack of all trades. Yeah, mahalo for joining us.
Yeah, mahalo, Davis, and yeah, mahalo for kind of providing opportunity to talk story a little bit about the ʻāina that we come from. Earlier the phrase was used, intact aupua'a. And of course, when you look at Hakipuʻu, it's easy to see the beauty of it, because it's not overdeveloped, yeah. But I think that sometimes when I hear that too, that phrase intact aupua'a, there's a little bit of me that kind of has a different view in a sense, and I think part of that is that like all of our ʻāina, part of what is missing is the people, in a sense, And in Hakipuʻu, we're lucky that parts of our ohana are still here and still able to live in Hakipuʻu, still able to be a part of this place. But really, there's a map that I've seen in the past. I haven't seen it for a while, but the title of the map says Remnants of Kanohana Hoku, referring to the pieces of land. But sometimes I feel like, that's who we are too. Yeah, we're the pieces that are still left, and we're lucky in a sense to have that. But realizing also that it's a part of a bigger picture that, in a sense, is not here too. Yeah, there's many of our ohana who over the years would have wanted to stay and still want to stay, and that's not possible in our current context. And I think that in a lot of ways Hakipuʻu is representative, and I think it's becoming painfully obvious the further we go down the road that that's the story of Hawaii now today. The children, who of us believes that it's going to be possible for our children and our children's children under the current context to buy a house, when the thing is starting at $1 million. That's the reality of today. And I think that story is a story that's has a long history, of course, so for me, I feel that I think that needs to change. How do we change that is a big question, and it's a big task. And I'm not. I was sharing with some of the people yesterday that I'm not real civically engaged. Yeah, this panel is about civic engagement, and for this particular issue, I'm not as engaged as I would like to be. So I was kind of struggling in a sense with, okay, what piece do I add to this? And I guess I want to kind of go way back, relatively. We're talking about the late 1700s, in Oahu history, and it has a piece of that story that connects to our ʻāina, more specifically Kualoa. But in that time, the chief was Kahahana. And if you look under Kamakau, if you look for the story of Kahahana, basically it tells this story. And it's kind of a long story, way longer than 3 minutes. But basically, it's about one of the resources of our ʻāina was the palawa pai. That's the teeth of the sperm whale. Yeah. And for our culture, it was the symbol of leadership. You know, it was a symbol of authority. And Kualoa was one of the places that resource was gotten from. And so when the chief Kahahana became the chief of Oahu, he was actually educated on Maui, and his ali'i there was Kahikili, and Kahikili asked for the lands of Kualoa when Kahahana became the chief of Oahu. But the kahuna of Oahu advised against it and said that if you give away Kualoa, you give away the whole thing. So there's no sense of you being the ali'i if you're going to give away the source of your authority. And so this kind of created a rift between Kahahana and his main kahuna, whose name was Ka'opulupulu. And that developed over the years until years later, basically there was no relationship between the two. And that's, you know, that's a key thing. It's the relationship between the decision maker, who is the ali'i, and the knowledge base, who is the kahuna. And when you have that type of rift, it's bad, you know, for the society. It got to the point basically where Kahahana wanted Ka'opulupulu gone, you know, wanted him out of the picture. And Ka'opulupulu realized that, and he actually decided, and he went with his son, and he basically sacrificed his own life and the life of his son for what he stood for. And basically, the story ends with a prophecy from Ka'opulupulu, and the words are "E nui ke aho ku keiki a moi ke kai, no ke kai ua ʻāina." Literally, it means take a deep breath and sleep in the ocean, because the land belongs to the ocean. And you know, there's a lot of different ways, in a sense, that prophecy was interpreted. One was that was the beginning of the takeover from Maui. You know, so the kingdom was lost, belongs to the ocean, meaning the invasion from the ocean. And then people have extended that to refer to the takeover from the Kamehameha Ohana, you know, from Maui and the Big Island. And then, you know, eventually, 1893, we have a takeover from way overseas, from the, you know, landing of troops from America, in a sense. And to me, you know, part of what these words are saying is that they saw, you know, they saw that we would lose control of our community, we would lose control of our government. But the piece that I kind of hold on to, I guess, from that, from these words from Ka'opulupulu, you know, who was one of his main heiau was in Hakipuʻu, right above where we live, is the first part. And the first part is "E nui ke aho," you know, which means to take a deep breath. And for me, I feel like, you know, all of these challenges, you know, challenges to live, challenges to take care of our environment, are going to take a long and sustained effort. And part of that effort is the ability to handle, to survive, you know. And so Ka'opulupulu said hundreds of years ago, take a long breath, you know, and when the time comes to puka and to start, you know, figuring out, okay, where we at, we'll still be here, you know, and to me, the beautiful thing is that we are still here, you know, and we're able to engage, maybe not, you know, like myself, not to the extent that I would like to, but we're still here, you know, and we still have our breath. And I think, you know, I mahalo, of course, Kolea and Summer and everybody on this panel and beyond, for, you know, to me, the critical thing is that we get together, yeah. Of course, within our ohana, within our community, but, you know, we live in a bigger context too. So, you know, we gotta talk story. So, sorry, I think I went a little bit over, but, you know, mahalo. And I hope this is part of continue, yeah, kuka, and envisioning.
Yeah, mahalo, Liko. Appreciate that. Again, bringing perspective of history and the significance. You know, the places are just place names sometimes, and when you know, share that fairly you know, old history, the lineage of mo'olelo that come from this place kind of puts things into perspective. We just a speck in time, but it's you have to use it wisely and as impactfully as possible for the short time that we have. And you know, I think that's a good segue to this next kind of Q&A, where we can dive a bit more into, you know, what the issues are in the immediate, you know, the regarding the immediate kind of dispute, and what the struggle that Kolea folks are and Summer folks are partaking in right now. And really, for me, I'm hoping to take away from this is, you know, the stand that's being taken is important, but what does that lead to? You know, how do we build on that? Yeah. So survive and thrive, yeah, is what I always hope for. So yeah, okay, Professor Forman, you're up. Take it away.
And it seems appropriate after that heavy discussion to take a deep breath. Also, a kalamai from my background screen. I don't know the technology, so bear with me. That was really informative. I wanted to thank all of the speakers. There's so many questions the Kokua have been listing here. We're going to try to get it as much as possible. But I think maybe what might be most helpful for the first question is to try to help people understand a little bit more. I mean, Liko gave some deep background about the place. But for both maybe Fukumitsu's and for Liko, you know, there are so few ohana left who are able to live together and manage an ahupua'a. What did the Hakipuʻu ohana do to be able to stay together through all of these generations? So maybe we'll defer to Kolea and Summer first, or we let you make the call. You can pass the baton to Liko if you like.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of us staying together was being related. We all had kind of the same responsibility, the same Kūpuna. So when it came down to, you know, everything around us, in that sense, through the generations, we lived right next to each other, neighbors. And throughout whatever turmoil happened and the pressures surrounding us, we still held on to the fact that we were all responsible for what we were given, what the Kūpuna gave us, or what they were told us. We all were responsible, and you know, throughout the generations, we all held on to that. And you know, some had to leave, and some, you know, left for better situations and whatnot, whatever the purpose was. But you know, there was always ohana there. There was always a home for families to go to, and I think that was the thing that kept us there, was like a home base of, you know, the background of where we came from.
And I think one thing from doing research for the Hakipuʻu history, a lot of the probate documents or deeds in Hakipuʻu that I've noticed is even during like pandemics that hit Hawaii and people were getting sick. A lot of times these ohanas the ohanas in Hakipuʻu were they would think so far ahead that they made sure to deed the land to each other, you know, whoever they knew was going to stay and was going to survive this. And there was a lot of land transfers to be able to hold the ʻāina inside. At least someone in the ohana is holding on to it, so it didn't end up being lost. And I feel like when I've read through these old documents, what has always amazed me is the strength and wisdom of the people in Hakipuʻu to do that, you know, to see ahead and know that it's important to keep the ʻāina of Hakipuʻu, you know, cared for by the people of Hakipuʻu. And that's been a pretty beautiful like thing to see after doing so much research on for the genealogy and watching, you know, the land transfers take place. So I know that is one reason that I've seen the strength that they, you know, pushed through and endured.
Yeah, yeah, I'll add in a little bit, you know, to me, again, you know, I do feel like we are the remnants, yeah, and there's, you know, although we've been fortunate to be able to stay, you know, the pressure for a lot of people didn't allow it for that, you know, and but I think that, you know, in a sense, the parts of our ohana that are still here is kind of a exceptional thing, you know, and I think there's different parts of why that is, but I also feel that, you know, that's not something that is unique to Hakipuʻu either. You know, that's something that that's an asset of all of the Hawaiian community, and I would say even beyond. You know, that importance of ohana, yeah, and trying to help each other out, you know, is key. You know, just to kind of give a little bit of illustration, and I think, you know, my Uncle Herbert's house, you know, he was kind of the main mea'ai, you know, for all of our luau. He was always the kind of the central food place, you know, and especially in my younger memories, you know, in the late 70s, 80s, when you had a luau, and I'm sure this is shared with many people, you know, throughout our state, you start 1 week earlier, yeah, and it goes 1 week past. So you're talking about like half a month. You know, the preparations, the food, the imu, you know, and all that time is all ohana coming over, you know, and they're all coming, they're all participating. And that's, you know, that's my early memories of that ohana, you know, in action. To me, the sad thing is that that is very, very rare now. You know, we're lucky if people can gather for one full day. You know, usually it's maybe just the evening. And to me, that's, you know, that's related to the civic engagement part too, in a sense. You know, I mean, that is civic engagement. Being able to connect with your ohana for long periods of time, you know, and really support each other, really get to know each other. Unfortunately, is a luxury today, you know, that most of us, we don't have anymore, you know. And I think that is critical, you know. Again, it comes back to the first need is a place to be, you know. And if you're spending 50% plus of your income just for your house, that doesn't leave a whole lot more, you know, to engage in ohana, to engage in community. But you know, I think how do we change that? You know, that's the discussion that I'm interested in. You know, how do we bully that?
Yeah, I think we'll definitely get to that and ask for people to share their visions a little bit. I want to ask a question to Kamana, although he may want to defer a little bit to Kolea and to you, Liko. And it has to do with his discussion of the reservation in the Native Hawaiian deeds, right? And it made me think about the 1978 Constitutional Convention, when the delegates said that, hey, we're doing this because we badly need judicial guidance, right, on some of these issues, the land rights that are tied to the deeds, for example. And I know that this was discussed in the Kalipi case, other cases that Hawaiians tried to assert claims based on the deeds, but those claims have never been resolved by the courts. But meanwhile, we've got adverse possession, quiet title, despite the efforts that the Fukumitsus and others have done to, you know, keep that land. There is a quiet title process that is in the law that allows for partition of land, right? Or to selling of the land. And I'm wondering, Kamana, if you'll say a little bit about the impacts of quiet title and adverse possession, and then maybe if Kolea and Liko can share a little bit about, you know, in this particular place, how that is played out.
Sure. Yeah, I can share some. So actually, this goes back really to the overthrow in many ways, at least in my research. Shortly after, you know, with the aid of the United States troops and because of, you know, the conspirators kind of took control of the government. Very quickly, one of the third things they start to discuss is how to change land law in Hawaii. And to fast forward, to answer it quickly, they go to New Zealand, they try to investigate the Torrens land system that eventually becomes the land court system that allows partitions of title to happen in Hawaii. But they passed this thing called the Land Act in 1895, and it substantially reclassifies land throughout all of Hawaii. It sets up, if you can read sections in my book, it has sections in there that allows dole to quiet title and to perfect title, essentially to try to displace Hawaiians. The system that Kauikeoli had created and Summer, you know, expanded on, allowed Kanaka to have rights to land. And sometimes you'll see instances, Root Keali Kolani on Mahaulepu on Kauai, for instance, she sells it to like 100 Hawaiians and they all hui up together. So there's all these complexities that were happening for our people in order to hold on to land. But after the overthrow, they fundamentally changed land law and they allow essentially these rights to be stripped away. The first case that I'm aware of is Dowsit v. Maukeala. And this is a really interesting case because it starts before the overthrow. And, you know, the Hawaiian wins at first and his rights to ʻāina are preserved. It gets reheard in the courts after the overthrow and the verdict flips. And so what you see after the overthrow is like a systemic effort to dispossess Hawaiians of this right, koina iki kuleana na kanaka. And David, you're right. I think it's never been fully resolved. But today, because we understand our land tenure, we understand our language and we understand our history, we're advocating, I think, from a different place. And it may be a political issue as much as it is a legal issue today.
I don't know if Kolea and Summer or Liko, if you want to talk about maybe the practical impact of quiet title and you know, despite the fact that you have an intact you know, Liko talked about the disruption of the management system, right? And, you know, something else filled that void, but it didn't continue the kind of knowledge base, right? And the reciprocal rights and obligations that were involved in that process. And so maybe you can share a little bit about, you know, how these laws that Kamana talked about have impacted what, you know, the families historically had done in that area. So maybe Liko first, and then
Sure.
Kolea. Okay.
You know, I gotta read Kamana's book. You know, and I think, you know, I think that's entirely right. You know, knowing how we got here is critical. You know, how did we get to the situation that we're at? Because then that gives us a sense of, okay, what direction were we coming from, yeah? But, you know, for me, again, you know, it's not a real specific viewpoint, but, you know, when I saw that map, and I think it said remnants of Kanohana Hoku, that's how I feel like. You know, we kind of, the last pieces, you know, and not a real, you know, just to me, the impact has been that it's been a struggle to be able to stay, you know, and that's the reality. And so, how do we, you know, how does that impact us? What I would say is that, you know, if you want, you know, for myself, I wanted to stay in Hakipuʻu. You try whatever you can, you know, any which way, and if something don't work, you try a different way. And I think for me, I feel like that's how all of the ohanas, you know, it's been a struggle. And again, I would say the majority, you know, we're the lucky ones in a sense, yeah. We're still here. The majority, even if they wanted to stay, we're not able to stay. And I think that's, you know, that's the you know, that's the eha part, yeah. You know, we all ohana. We all belong to this ahupua'a. But in the current way, not everybody can, you know, it's a struggle.
Kolea, Summer, anything you wanted to add?
I wish that we had sent in the 1907 kuleana map of Hakipuʻu. I feel like it would be such a beautiful representation of the amount of kuleana lands that originally existed in Hakipuʻu and the amount of different family names. I believe there was 43 kuleana land commission awards, and today there's, like Liko said, it's like the remnants of that still exists, you know. And even if you look at a current GIS plot map for the property tax assessment, none of those kuleana land commission awards, none of those ohana names even exist anymore on our current maps, in the current map system. Like, all of those ohana names have been erased from Hakipuʻu, unless you go and research and find, you know, old maps like that 1907 map, and it's heartbreaking to see so many ohanas that previously existed in Hakipuʻu, and to know that there's a handful left. And like Liko said, it is such a struggle, you know, like in our modern day society to even hold on and try to remain on this ʻāina. It's like a daily battle, especially, you know, hoping that your children would inherit not just the ʻāina, but the same traditional and cultural practices and knowledge and how to preserve that for another generation or a generation after. I think when you look at a map like that 1907 kuleana map, it's almost overwhelming to think that you can sustain, you know, ohana still in Hakipuʻu for another, just what we have left, you know. If 43 ohanas could be, you know, brought down to how many is left now. How do we hold on and remain there to carry on the traditions and the culture?
Yeah, there's 43 LCAs given. 41 had Royal Patent Awards. Each of those had between 3 to 5 apanas, which was like different lots, 3 to 5 different lots. And so even 43 might seem like, oh, I never have that much. They were each awarded different lots, one for a house, you know, one for lo'i, one for a chicken coop or stable. So, you know, this was areas that was frequented by the Kanaka, and now there's not much remnants. There's, you know, it's what it is now. We're trying to get back to where we once were.
Okay, mahalo. I'm gonna turn to Malia now, and I'm gonna give you an idea of what I'm gonna ask, and then I'm gonna try to set it up a little bit more. So give you some time to think about it. But I want you to bring us back a little bit closer. You talked a little bit about, you know, prior warnings that were given about potential destruction, and you talked about you know, incidences of human waste, and from my, you know, listening to the U.S. Supreme Court debates about the impact on cesspools, I'm assuming that it's really difficult to trace exactly where that waste comes from. But so what I really want to get to, though, Malia, is, you know, the question you raised about whose burden is that, right? Whose responsibility is that? You know, after you had this division of interests that Kamana talked about, right? You know, so you've now got private landowners, and you've got eventually the state that comes in, and you had suggested that, you know, the state agencies, at least from what you can tell, aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. And you and I both do Native Hawaiian law trainings for members of boards and commissions now, right? Because OHA convinced the legislature to adopt that law. But are those responsibilities being fulfilled? Are the agencies following the Kapa'akai framework? And if they're not, what are the remedies for community members? So it's a very complicated question. That's what Davis gets for asking a law professor to be the moderator. But since you also a law professor, then I think you can pull that apart, or you can, you know, you can phone a friend to Kamana and bring him in if you like to.
Yeah, so yeah, you know, as I look at the different laws, you know, the constitutional provisions for public trusts and Native Hawaiian rights, you know, it's elevated Native Hawaiian rights to, you know, fundamental rights that need to be protected. And then you have the public trust provision in the Constitution, which basically says for present and future generations, we have to, you know, malama our natural environment. And then the cases that came out of that, like Waihole and some of the Molokai cases on water, expand that into saying the public trust also includes Native Hawaiian rights and practices. So, you know, and the court has been clear that it's not just a good business manager kind of standard, it's a trustee, the duties of a trustee to the beneficiaries, and Native Hawaiians are beneficiaries. The ʻāina itself is a beneficiary that must be protected. So that's the standard. But what I'm seeing is, you know, these agencies aren't even following their regular regulations, let alone their constitutional obligations. And when you look at civil matters, the burden is not on the kanaka to prove. The burden is on the agency. The burden is on those who apply for permits. But in this instance, they didn't even apply for permits. So, you know, there, even within the regulations itself, you know, there's civil penalties. There's certain state water quality laws that prohibit discharge of pollutants into state waters, which includes raw sewage. And there's civil administrative penalties and jail time. You know, so for civil penalties, it's supposed to be $25,000 a day for separate offense. Administrative penalties, 2,500 up to 25,000. And then if you've been convicted for negligence, you know, you basically up that to 50,000. For knowing violations, you up that to as much as 100,000. And even imprisonment up to 6 years. So not even following any of those rules. And if Department of Health and EPA are just gonna ask questions but not actually do the testing, and more time passes, and then the, you know, the water quality may improve over time, then there's no proof, you know, there's erasure of this. You know, and then when you look at public trust, like there was a Molokai case where it had to do with groundwater withdrawals that was going to affect the limu, crab, and fishing grounds in Kamiloloa on Molokai. And it was clear that, you know, the court said it wasn't the burden of the Hawaiians to show that their fishery was going to be impacted. It was the burden of the one applying for a permit. So, you know, the fact that this community has to, on its own dime, do its own water quality testing, that's unacceptable, you know. So, so then you get into instances where Hawaiians get criminalized too. So in an instance where Kolea and his neighbor, Ian Masterson, were arrested, it had to do with the breaking of a cesspool, and then wanting to reutilize that cesspool and do trenching and install pipes that would essentially jeopardize the iwi Kūpuna. And then you have Kolea and his family and their neighbors saying, this is wrong. You're already in violation. You cannot put in those pipes. The cesspool is broken. But no, I want to do what I want to do. And then the cops get caught, and it's the Kanaka, you know, and his conscientious neighbor that gets arrested. You know, so now you're putting Hawaiians in a criminal law context, and the burden shifts to the Hawaiian to prove that he was doing a Hawaiian practice, which is malama. But a lot of the cases is like when that's where the flashpoints are of conflict, when you're trying to do malama, you know, and government is using its authority, you know, to regulate Native Hawaiian rights. So I think, you know, the impact of inaction from the government basically relegates Hawaiians to criminals, you know, and then you add that into a global pandemic where Native Hawaiians are more susceptible to such things. And then you also look at the fact that this is also an environmental justice issue. You know, why is a place in Hakipuʻu where you have Native Hawaiian hupa tenants, why aren't they important versus, you know, maybe a more wealthy neighborhood? Like, would this have been acceptable in, say, Hawaii Kai? You know, so you see this kind of discrepancies in the treatment of people, and that has to stop.
Mahalo, Maria. I know we got plenty of questions, and I know there's no way we're ever going to get through all of this. I hope Davis will allow us to, you know, field some of those and answer them by email or follow up with people later. But I think Malia has hit on some really important issues here. You know, talking about the pandemic and life, and, you know, the trauma that the Fukumitsus talked about. You know, this is a real burden to you know, come forward and to become civically engaged when you're dealing with all of these situations. And let me try to make a little bit of a connection that I think I see in some of the questions. my understanding is that one of the earlier conflicts actually happened while Kolea and Summer were at Mauna Kea. And so they had to return from Mauna Kea in order to deal with things that were happening on the land, that the family kind of called them back. And, Malia had talked about the burden of proof. And my understanding is that that was a specific point of error that was raised in the Mauna Kea case, which none of the Supreme Court justices, the majority, the concurring, or the dissenting justice addressed. It was briefly addressed in a footnote that was later deleted from the opinion, but they didn't recognize the law that Malia mentioned, and the agency itself didn't recognize the clear law under their own rules that places the burden on the permit applicant. And so I think that's a really profound statement that Malia made there, is that showing how the failure of the state to do its work, to do its reciprocal obligation, ends up really hurting the families, right? So it's basically, you have the government and the landowner placing the burden on the people rather than doing the work that they need to do in order to make the situation something where everybody can work together. And I don't know if Kamana wants to, what kind of vision, how can we make this work going forward? I don't know, I went off a little bit there, Kamana, but I think maybe you have something to share.
Well, I think that's a really powerful question, David, and you're right. I believe Davis kind of characterized, this particular struggle in Hakipuʻu alongside the other initiatives that are happening all across Hawaii. Mauna Kea, down for a while, there's things in Kahuku, Waimanalo. And so your question on how do we get, the state of Hawaii to live up to the things that they wrote and they approved in their own constitution, is a really profound one. And that's one that, I think many of us work towards achieving and struggle with. Presently, I wish I knew the answer. We might not be able to get them to ultimately fulfill their responsibilities, but what I see on this panel and across Hawaii is incredible resilience of our people to accept nothing less. And we're in a period of huliau. This is from Mauna Kea, the last iteration on Mauna Kea just a little over a year ago to where we are today. It's hard to predict, that we would be here in this place and see the resilience and power of our people in taking command and leadership all across Hawaii. So I wish I think we got to go back to Liko's point in this prophecy, whether it's Nui Ke Aho or Ho'ale Kalepo Popolo, Kumajan Kaimikawa's prophecy about our people rising up. It takes the strength and resilience of us to fix, the incredible historical injustice that we face on a daily basis. But we come from a position of strength. We come from powerful people who have fought to make it better for us every generation. Auntie Charlene, Liko's mom, on the Constitutional Convention, to try to improve situations for Hawaiians, generations of struggles for Hawaii, and we see it here today with Kolea and Summer, with land struggles. So I wish there was a way to solve this analytically with one magic swipe, but I think in struggling, we become more powerful, we become more resilient, we become more resolute.
Sounds like Summer wanted to add on. Go ahead, Summer. I just need to unmute yourself.
I think that what Kamana had said about that we, it's us, rising. You know, I think even when it comes to this water testing and it being a burden on, you know, the community financially, I think one of the biggest lessons that we've learned as a community from that is, I originally was saying, oh, we're all learning to be microbiologists now, like what all these different, you know, bacterias are and what bacterias are dangerous. And then someone actually said to me, but we've always been microbiologists. They just didn't have a name to it before, you know. Traditionally, that was our skill. We knew the water quality. We understood if the water was safe, or what happened up Mauka comes down to the ocean. And it kind of shifted my focus to realize we're just taking responsibility for what we have, you know, all of us should be responsible for, and we are becoming the ones to carry the kuleana. And I think a lot of that is happening all over Hawaii, where people are standing up and, you know, state agencies aren't doing their job. And we've been in this long process of trying to follow out every protocol and process, make, you know, letters to DOH and letters to SHPD and following all these processes. But at the same time, it's learning to step back into that responsibility of, this is our job to be the microbiologists of this ahupua'a and to know what's going on in the ocean and what's affected because of that. You know, and I think we kind of are the ones that rise up and take that responsibility.
Yeah, mahalo. I think, and there's some really exciting work being done at the University of Hawaii at Mānoa. You know, Malia is part of ʻāina Momona. Kiana Frank comes to mind, you know, the microbiology work that she's doing that's documenting things that are written in the Kumulipo. Very powerful stuff. But returning to this question of, you know, the burden that is placed on, how can that burden be lessened? I mean, are there things that community members can be done, Surfrider or somebody else, to help with monitoring? Or are there things that a landowner in the area that wants to cooperate with how can that cooperation be more productive? Are there things that can be done to heal some of these rifts that sometimes predate, but sometimes are carried over from centuries?
Yeah, so, you know, the UH professors from the science team actually reached out, and they've been working with our community to try to figure out a regular testing schedule to kind of get a baseline, you know, for the bacteria that's constantly present in the water, and, you know, what causes it to elevate and when is it safe. You know, that was our biggest question. When is the water safe to go into the ocean, or when is it safe to actually eat the fish or, you know, the crabs? Because at one point, or still while we're testing it, it's actually way above what a safety level would be. You know, like it's way, the bacteria levels are too high that it's actually maybe not the safest to eat the fish. But in that, the UH professor group actually put together a whole invoice or estimate for the testing that they would have to do, and there was a funder that came up to help pay for half of it. I know they also reached out to the large landowner in the community to try to see if they could maybe carry some of that cost so that it didn't have to be on the you know, just the residents themselves. And then Surfrider has reached out, which has been awesome. This is only maybe the second week that we're going to do testing through Surfrider and that Blue Water Task Force. And that's been pretty nice to have them, you know, reach out and actually do the specific testing that is used by Department of Health, you know, for the EPA levels. And so there has been a good amount of different organizations reaching out recently to be able to help carry that burden, which has been nice. You know, I think as it was kind of, we realized it's going to be a long extended testing process to just get a baseline of what's going on in the ocean. And we realized this is going to be a pretty heavy financial burden over time for our community that's just, we're just trying to get by, especially during this pandemic.
I want to do a check-in with Davis Price and our Jewel and our support. I saw that there were some questions from on the chat about if there's an email that people can send questions in. Well, I'm assuming that we're gonna save the chat. I'll do that right now on my, oh no, I cannot do it on Zoom. Usually I can. But if we just save those emails, is there an email that folks can send questions and we can share and see if any of the Brain Trust here can follow up?
Actually,
that's
yeah.
one question. Go ahead.
Actually, yeah, Hoku, one of the law students, actually volunteered the ELP address.
Okay.
So it's ELP, and then Jewel, if you can drop this in the Zoom chat and the Facebook thread, it's elp@hawaii.edu. Yeah,
So now you guys know who's in charge.
It's good for follow-up questions. And, you know, let me take this time. We're coming up to our closing time. But, you know, there's a number of questions that came in, all similar, asking, you know, what community can do. And I want to just offer my perspective on that. And then if I'm off, or if you folks have anything to add, you know, first of all, this engaged, you know, this webinar series is centered around, you know, civic engagement, and civic engagement can be driven by a number of, you know, a person's desire to be engaged can be driven by a number of reasons. One that we often see is the desire for change, and I think that we've identified a couple of areas that lead to that stem from systemic issues. You know, if you have a large landowner who's not being held accountable or doesn't feel the need to follow regulations and rules, doesn't follow them, and then is not held accountable by the entities who are tasked with upholding those regulations and rules, you got to go to the top. Right? So whether it's the Department of Planning or Department of Health or the state government, some branch of the state government, you know, there's, from a political sense, I think there's all of us can demand change, accountability from government, which, I mean, right now it's just, we're not in it's not pleasant, it's not effective. It's almost, I can't help but just kind of laugh at it. But it's troubling. And we see that with, response to COVID. And this is all of these issues that we've seen the community rise up for in the last year stem from some form of either miscommunication or derelictness on the part of the government. And we can call it out, which is important, but it's also important to exercise our voices and use the tools that we have. And one of those is to vote. We've gone over that multiple times on this webinar series, and voting, it's a simple tool to use, although it's hard to know who to vote for. And I think part of our collective kuleana is demanding a shift in values from decision makers, right? We have to instill malama ʻāina principles, ike Kūpuna practices at the highest level. In fact, I mean, it's been done. It's part of the Constitution. This is what our Kūpuna, that many of whom are still with us today, fought for in the 70s. Liko's dad, his parents were two of them at the Kankan, and it's important that we demand accountability. And one way for us to do that is to vote. And going forward, it's gonna, like you said, it's gonna be a long-term struggle. And so voting is one way. Holding government entities is one way. I think another way is to partake in the changes that we seek. And something, and I'll kick it off, and I'll hand off to you folks to answer as well. But when you have an intact, aupua'a, and you have mauka lands that were once highly productive, likely still fertile, and then at one end, and then you have probably the most functional loko i'a on Oahu at the other end, remaining, and right now we're dealing with food security issues. It's really unacceptable that we're not talking about putting lands back to use for food production and getting people to work on those lands for food production. And I'm not entirely clear on all the uses that the current large landowner uses those lands for. But I know for me personally, I would start having those discussions with people around me, which is what I've been doing, about demanding better management of our land that fulfills the needs of our communities. And food is a basic necessity. So I would think that that's something that would be part of the equation, and that those discussions are happening across ʻāina, right? So, what are the food security issues? What are the land management and resource management issues in your own communities? Yes, lending kokua to protect Hakipuʻu is important, and we should figure out ways for people to kokua directly. But in the meantime, this is not unique. Yeah. So I would say engage and really we have to elevate the discussion around changes in leadership values. We're not, the neglect by current leadership of the needs of our communities is derelict, and it's unacceptable. And so just having these discussions is a good start, and finding out who's taking up these battles in your own communities. So kalamai for rambling a bit, but I wanted to make sure we get to that question and give everybody and try to be a bit direct in, what we think community can do to support this current effort. So maybe start with Malia.
And so, there is a website, protecthakipuʻu.org, and if you follow Instagram, then I believe it's at Protect Hakipuʻu. So there's a lot of more information on these sites. There's videos of what happened with the Naholoa'a property, and there's ways to call different agencies. And I think the people in Hakipuʻu, they need good legal representation too, especially as to iwi Kūpuna. I think the water quality issues, we're still looking at the data and collecting that data, but there are permits that have not been applied for burials that need protection, EV that has already been desecrated, and so those kinds of things, I think legal representation would be required for that, and to ensure that no further burials and historic sites are impacted. And I just wanted to say, there is power in community, and this issue affects all of us. When I look at Hakipuʻu, it's a kipuka, and Professor Daviana McGregor, she talked about that. These are like oases of knowledge, Hawaiian ike, and if we lose that, then our entire culture suffers. So it's protecting these kind of last strongholds is really important. And it's important to speak truth to power. I mean, I'm from Molokai, and we got the hand-painted signs. We're very involved in in these meetings and speaking up and doing our homework. So sometimes there's a sense, especially on Oahu with a lot of overdevelopment, there's a sense of hopelessness that we as individuals can do very little. But I think, when we collectively work on these issues and do our homework, as the late George Helms said, do your homework. And just because you don't have a college degree doesn't mean you cannot do homework, and I see that on Molokai, when we fought Molokai Ranch on the La'au Point development, there are 3 aunties that I don't think they had anything beyond a high school education, and they became Endangered Species Act monk seal experts. you know, and we had 5,000 out of 7,000 people testify, and we shut that project down. So there's power in community, and don't forget that, you know. And as you know, Kamana was talking about the prophecy at Pakui was ho ale kalepo popolo. It's like the people of the land shall rise. The guys with the soil on their leg coming out of a taro patch, you know. And that prophecy was made on my island, in Ahupua'a, right next to where I live, you know. And so I see that heiau, and I know that story very well. And it was looking from 1819 into 200 years. 2019 was, you know, the 200-year mark, and Mauna Kea movement was, you know, coming together and was bringing our kanaka together. And you can see the power in that, you know. So it is our time that Hulihia is happening now. And, you know, and I just want to share this story with you guys. You know, it was an experience I had with Kolea and Summer and another friend, Kalena. You know, we were in Hakipuʻu, and we received a call of a monk seal that was in distress at the Kualoa Beach Park. And so we were asked to do protocol. And when we went there, the seal looked like it was gonna die, and the seal was hapai. And, you know, so we concentrated our prayers and our mana to assist this seal. And then the seal gave us her name, and it was Hanau Huli'ea. You know, born is this transformation towards sovereignty, towards our ea. And when we said her name, she swam away as though she was not even sick. And she's supposed to hanau around this time. And now we know she traveled to Kauai to have her pup. You know, and that significance is not lost on me. You know, Liko talked about the chiefly authority coming from Kualoa, and it's his father being interviewed. I listened to his podcast on Kapahu Kapu, and he talked about that he dreamt of many whales, many palawa, beaching themselves on the shores of Kualoa to give their niho. And Uncle Calvin asked them in his dream, why are you stranding yourselves? Why are you sacrificing yourselves? He said, more kanaka need to speak. We need to speak the truth. And we need to rise again and restore our ea. So when I look at what's happening at Hakipuʻu, you know, this sort of insidious, cancerous spread and theft of Hawaiian lands, you know, and then you have these remnant families holding and standing their ground. It speaks to me that this is an issue important to all Kanaka, you know, and the significance is not lost on me as to why the government is behaving in the way that it is, because that sovereign authority, that pono leadership is not there in Kualoa. And when you are the new konohiki of these lands, you have kuleana. You have kuleana to the people. And if you're not fulfilling that kuleana, then you don't deserve that kind of leadership. And it affects all of us. So to me, I think the time is now for that huli. Things happen on a spiritual level and they manifest physically. So I can be an attorney talking about these different laws, but there are deeper things that from the hohonu, from the depths, we are seeing other things happening. And so this issue is important to all of us, to the entire Kapai ʻāina.
Right on, mahalo Malia. Kamana, like share briefly what the community can do collectively.
Yeah, I just want to kāko'o what Malia is saying in terms of, sometimes can feel, especially in this pandemic, a little bit like you standing alone. But these efforts remind us that we all connected together. And And I do, I believe that Uncle Walter, I think when he had his campaign, he said, Kapu Aloha is the shield and our spear is the voting and political activism and galvanizing. So, I think we have to keep that in mind. We got to do both those things. And yeah, support, what we're seeing right now is I think we have, Aloha ʻāina has so many allies here in Hawaii, all across the world. People stand with us. And we just continue to rise and exert leadership, even across our economy. Right now in this pandemic, billionaires getting richer and richer, and GDP is good for the top, and so many people are suffering. And so we know we just got to change that system and empower our ancestral ways of relating to ʻāina and innovation. And those are the things I think we're doing really every day, step by step, community by community.
Mahalo kamana. Liko?
Yeah, mahalo, for inviting me to be, to talk story. To me, that's the way forward, is to connect with each other, and if it means the Zoom for now, this is how we gotta do it. But I think talking to each other, trying to figure out the ways forward. A lot of these things are kind of big, and I just want to share. A few years ago, one of our artists, Solomon Enos, he was on the TV, and he did a mural about Maui and Nanakuli, because Nanakuli has a strong Maui tradition. But Hakipuʻu is also connected to Maui, and if you look into the Kumulipo, there's a part there, there's a big section with Maui, and the last lines are I kahalu kewe, I waikane kapiko, haʻule I Hakipuʻu I koloa. And so kind of this is, his last fall, in a sense, was in Hakipuʻu and koloa. But the thing that Solomon shared about Maui and his mural was that Maui slowed the sun, and these are the level, and I think people have said it tonight, that these are big themes that we're talking about, big movements in our society, in our world, and I think we can even throw in there, the climate change part of that. And I think that's what Solomon was talking to. But, to me, the nice thing that Solomon said was that we've slowed the sun before, and we come from that tradition of doing big things, and I think to me that's comforting. We have big challenges right now, but we don't have to panic. We've done these things before, and to me, the way to do them again is to like has already been said too, is connect up with each other, talk to each other, and share those things.
Right on, mahalo Liko. And Kolea and Summer, anything you wanna, if you can wrap up and let everyone know, what type of support you folks can utilize and how they can kokua.
Well, we'd like to thank everybody for being on this webinar, first of all, and all the support and all the aloha everybody shows us. Just add to, not just for our community, but for every community, to just stay vigilant to what's happening around you. Everybody has a kuleana to be responsible for what's going on.
And I think what Malia had said, that we have the Protect Hakipuʻu, the web page, and the Instagram starting to go, because we're in this time with COVID where people can't really do any gatherings. So a lot of our kahes or calls to people for action has been more sending letters or making phone calls to these departments to try to get action, immediate action, so that these the burial sites can be protected so that the pollution, you know, can be handled. So mahalo to everyone that has already responded to those kahas, because it has made a big difference. Like the community involvement is a huge, you know, with this social media and just like this virtual connection everyone has, it's made a big difference. And I think also one thing that we realized when we went up to Mauna Kea was kind of like we were almost like this fire was lit being up there, you know, and standing with the lohui. It's like, it was like be a fire lit, and then you went home and you took that home with you to say like, what is sacred to us? What is sacred to this place? What needs to be protected in our home? And I think if we all do that, if we continue to keep lighting each other, you know, like those fires in each other, then these movements will continue to happen and change will continue to happen. And then that huli that, you know, we've talked about will actually be created. And so I think maybe continuing to work in your own communities to look around and see what is sacred and what needs to be protected or fought for in your community, for your children and the generation that comes after them.
Right on. Mahalo, gang. And Professor Forman, any closing thoughts before we sign off?
No, it's just, I mean, some deep Ho'ailona being shared there earlier. Malia had mentioned George Helm, and I saw Kolea going in and out every once in a while. He kind of looks like George Helm every now and then. But
I should have mentioned that in his intro. The film that's recently been made, hopefully released soon. Kolea actually is also an actor. Yeah, played George Helm in the film.
I'm not surprised. We're not going to ask him to sing right now, but mahalo everybody, and you know, we'll try. I'm going to let my the kokua, the two ELPRAs that are helping out on this call, and they'll help field the questions and, you know, try to reach out to all of you. So we cannot reply right away. I cannot speak for people, right? But we'll try to do what we can to help educate. So mahalo everybody.
Right on. Mahalo to all of you. Mahalo for all of you panelists and the work, and especially the folks on the ground. And each of you have kuleana that you awamo every day, and that's critical to the lahui. So mahalo for taking the time to join us and share it. Mahalo to everyone that tuned in to this first reboot of our Aloha Rising series. We'll be running for the next 5 weeks. Next week, Kumuhina and Mehana will be on, talking story along with Hale Aloha Ayau about Iwi Kūpuna and the burial councils. And that's going to be actually, they're going to give the rundown on what the burial council's role is, and there will likely be a kahea for people to apply to become members of the burial council. So we're going to touch on different ways that we can engage. Yeah, again, continuing this discussion about how do we utilize the different tools in the toolbox in terms of civic engagement. And you know, the following weeks we're going to cover revisioning our economy, our health, physical, mental, spiritual, given this COVID time during this pandemic, and another topic will be affordable housing in this next series of webinars. So continue to tune in every Thursday at 2 o'clock at our OHA Facebook. And for more information on voting and this series, visit oha.org/vote. The general election's coming up. I believe the deadline to register is October 5th to get your ballot in the mail. And the ballots will be dropping in the mail around October 16th. So stay engaged. You know, I also want to touch on, you know, the primary election. We broke records in Hawaii for turnout, and that's a good sign. Yeah, and there's still a lot of opportunity to elevate Aloha ʻāina issues, values to the forefront during these elections. So please stay engaged, continue to talk story, continue to learn, and remember to vote and look at and learn about the other tools that you can utilize to engage for your community and for the lahui. So mahalo nui, gang. We see you folks next week. Yep. Aloha ʻāina.
Wow.